There's a smell I can't describe to anyone who hasn't already breathed it in themselves. It's a mixture. Incense. Heavy. Resinous. The kind you get in a cathedral during high feast, like the one on the world where I was born. They burned it on holy days. I remember how the smoke would scratch at your throat, and my mother would say, "That's him. He sees us." Machine oil. Not the filthy kind that reeks from bilge mechanics, but clean, almost medicinal. What we call blessed oil, sacred oil of the mechanicum. It comes in tall, dark flasks sealed with wax, and they're only opened with a prayer. And the third smell, one that has no pretty name. Old blood, not fresh. Fresh blood smells like iron. Anybody who's ever broken their nose knows that. Old blood smells different. It works its way into the microscopic cracks of the ceramite so deep that no solvent touches it. No fire, no prayer. Though I read the prayer anyway, every single time I pick up the brush. 50 years of muscle memory. That's the smell of Astartes armor. I've known it for 37 years. Sometimes I dream of it, and then I wake up sweating, because in the dream I'm always young, standing on the threshold of the apothecarium. I'm 14, and they haven't rejected me yet, haven't written me off, haven't turned me into a man with a rag. In that dream, every single time I think, this time it'll be different. This time the osmodula will take. This time Apothecary Druce will look at me not like a broken instrument, but like a future brother. But the dream always ends the same way, with pain in my bones. That night, the armory was dark. The lumen strips on the ceiling were flickering. Somewhere in the drive section, they were running scheduled maintenance, redistributing power through the ship. I was alone. Hanging on the central rack was Captain Varian's right pauldron, 42 centimeters of cast ceramite, decorated with the Ice Ridge motif, the emblem of our order, heavy as a tombstone, beautiful as a tombstone. I'd been holding it for 3 hours already, polishing a scratch, a bolt ricochet, fired by one of our own in the confusion of the Yarn-Heel engagement. I saw the footage from the pick sensor myself. 14 seconds of fighting in a ruined hangar. The scratch was going to stay. I'd known that from the first hour, but I kept polishing anyway, just to give my hand something to do at 3 a.m. And then I did what I sometimes do, when I know for certain that nobody's watching. I lifted the pauldron and pressed it against my shoulder. Heavy. Impossibly heavy. My joints screamed immediately. That's the memory of the apothecarium, the osmodula, that burned through me and then left without finishing its work, taking everything with it. But I held it. 1 second. 2. 3. In the half-dark, in the mirror of polished ceramite, I saw my own face. Bald skull with a scar running from the back of my head to my left temple. The mark of a probe that went in too deep during the extraction of a failed implant. Bags under my eyes that aren't going anywhere. An apron stained with oil. 70 years of a lived life. 40 of them here, in this hall, with this rag. I put the pauldron back, picked up a fresh cloth, kept polishing. My name is Kyle. I have served this order longer than many Astartes within it have been alive. I have never killed a Xenos in open battle. Never stood under an open sky on a foreign planet in full armor. I am not the tip of the spear and not the last line of defense. I'm the one who gets the tip of the spear ready to go. I clean the armor of gods. And if you think that sounds modest, like an admission of failure, like the confession of a man who made his peace with things, you're right. Partly. I did make my peace, but not the way broken men make peace, the way men make peace who fought for a long time and got tired, and in that tiredness found something that resembles quiet. Today, for the first time in my life, I'm going to tell someone what it's actually like. Not the way the hymns tell it, not the way the chaplain preaches it, where everything gleams and smells only of incense. The way it is, the way it actually smells. Morning aboard the unyielding Retribution doesn't start with a sunrise. There's no sunrise here. There's only a change of lighting. At 4:30 ship time, the lumina in the living quarters switches from red to white, and I feel that shift even through sleep. 40 years of conditioning. The body wakes up before the mind has a chance to. My quarters are a niche in the bulkhead near the captain's chambers. 3 meters by 1.5. A fold-out bunk that squeaks in 2 places. A tool locker with a brass latch I once oiled and then forgot, so now it opens with force, as if even the locker wants to remind me I'm not as precise as I used to be. A shelf with 2 books, a worn copy of the Armor Care Regulations, and a battered hymnal I've carried since my homeworld. My mother pressed it into my hands before I left for the trials. "For luck," she said. "The book is still with me. As for the luck, I'm not sure." I get up, and immediately, pain. Not the sharp kind you cry out from and grab at. The background kind, chronic. Like the hum of the reactor. You stop noticing it, but it never goes quiet. The spine. 3 vertebrae that fused wrong. The left shoulder, a scapula deformed back in the apothecarium. The knees, just old age, nothing heroic. The osmodula worked in my bones for several hours before my body rejected it. Those hours left a mark for life. Every morning is a reminder, you were chosen, but you didn't pass. You were good enough to be tested, and not good enough to be finished. That sounds like bitterness. It hasn't been bitterness for a long time. Just a fact. Facts stop hurting after a few decades. Almost stop. Wash up at the basin. Cold water. The hot water is rationed for the Astartes. They have regenerative needs, infusions, specific requirements. It's written in the regulations. Mine aren't. Put on the work robe, tie the apron, check the tools on my belt. 3 sizes of brushes, oil in a small flask, polishing stone, a 3.7 wrench. All in place. I go. By 5 o'clock, I'm in the captain's chambers. Varian is standing in the center of the room. He's always standing. Astartes rarely sit when they don't have to. A body remade for war perceives the horizontal as vulnerability. Even at rest, they hold their spines straight, as if they were trained to stand before someone who is always more important, or as if they are always more important than everyone around them. Varian is staring at the wall, not meditating. I know his meditation. It's with closed eyes and the catechism on his lips. He's just waiting for us to do our work. 3 of us, as always. Me and 2 others. Mira, a young woman somewhere in her 20s, quiet and precise in her work. Her world paid the order and people as tribute, and she chose the ship over the mines. And old Gentius, who has served the order 10 years longer than I have, and who long ago stopped talking about anything except the work. Each of us has our zone, silently established without any order. It just settled that way over the years. Gentius takes the legs and lower back. Mira, the torso, breastplate, gorget, vambrace. Me, the arms, pauldrons, helmet. We move around him without speaking. Everyone knows their place. Everyone knows their bolts. First, the underlayers of compressed synth fiber, worn directly over the skin and over the black carapace. The last of 19 implants, a neuroreactive subcutaneous interface that runs across the back and sides in a web of tiny sockets, binding the Astartes to the power armor directly through nerve signals. Without it, the armor is just an expensive metal coffin. I know this from books. I've never felt it from the inside. Then the plates. Greaves, knee guards, each with a double click. First fixes, second confirms. Cuisses. The breastplate in 2 halves. The back plate. Mira works cleanly and fast. Good hands. Gentius grunts as he lowers himself to one knee. His back isn't what it used to be either. I take the right pauldron, the one with the scratch. Yarn Hele was yesterday, I say. A bad habit, breaking the working silence. But sometimes you need to just say words out loud just to make sure you're still here. Second squad lost 3. Sergeant Tavius. His gene seed is preserved, says Varian. His voice is like tectonic plates shifting. Low even, almost no inflection. Not without feeling. Just very careful with it. Every word measured. Brother Apothecary Sewell managed to extract the progenoids before the withdrawal. Rare luck in that kind of fight. I know, I say. I helped with transporting the body. A pause. I click the left pauldron into place. Captain, I say. My voice betrays me. Drops just slightly. Do you remember back when we were young, hunting ice serpents up near the northern ridge? You had that knife with the wooden handle. You cut it yourself from the white larch. We sat in that blind for 2 days and finally got our chance. The left shin servo, he says, cutting through me. Yesterday, cross-country movement. There was a lag. 0.3 seconds. Needs calibration. Gentius drops to his knee immediately, producing a diagnostic probe. Mira, the 3.7 wrench. And that's it. Conversation over. It always ends like that. In the middle of my sentence, without explanation, without excuse me. I'm busy. The next question is operational, and the space my words occupied collapses as if it was never there. I say nothing. I tighten the right pauldron's fastening. My fingers know every bolt, every pass. I close my eyes, and my hands work on their own. 40 years of memory in the joints. We're both sons of an ice planet on the edge of the system, where winter lasts 8 months, and in summer the grass grows to ankle height and dies immediately. I remember him as a boy. I remember how he cried after his first kill in the trials. His opponent slipped, Varian struck, and then he sat beside the body and cried quietly, thinking no one could see. I saw, I told him. It's right. It's how it should be. I was lying, but that was the lie he needed. Exactly then. Now he's nearly 2.5 meters tall in full armor, a mountain of muscle and plate that doesn't see the person standing at his shoulder, or sees them, the way you see a bolt fitting. Functions. Works well. I lower the helmet onto his head. The lock clicks with a soft, deep sound. Well-fitted parts. The face of my childhood friend disappears behind the death mask. Done, says Mira. Varian takes 3 steps toward the door, stops, doesn't turn. The scratch on the right pauldron is not fully addressed. I'll get to it tonight, I say. The door closes. Not a slam, not a bang. Just the heavy finality of metal on metal. I stand in the empty chambers. The smell of incense and oil on the floor. Marks from his magnetic boots. I get the cloth, wipe them up. Gentius straightens slowly, groaning. Looks at me in silence with an understanding that is somehow worse than its absence. Old men sometimes understand too much and say too little. Mira leaves quickly. She has 3 more armor sets before breakfast. I stay a moment longer, look at the empty center of the room where he was standing. The place still feels occupied. The air hasn't had time to fill the shape of his body. Then I take the brush. Keep working. I need to tell this part, even though I don't want to. This is the piece I turn over in my head every night. Not because I want to, because it comes on its own, like the pain in the spine when the pressure changes. Uninvited. Familiar. There were 127 of us, young men from Kurda, gathered from across the world over 2 months. The order runs its selection every few years when the time comes. 3 figures in black robes arrive on riding animals, and immediately the whisper spreads through the villages. The order is looking. Families with boys of the right age feel something between pride and terror. Pride, because being chosen is an honor sung across generations. Terror, because nobody comes back. Not as an Astartes, not as themselves. They took Varian and me together, though he was a year older. The order was closing a gap after a brutal campaign. The trials lasted 2 years. I won't describe them in detail, not because there isn't anything to say, but because that isn't the story I want to tell. I'll just say, those who survived, survived. Cold, hunger, fighting other candidates, hunting, marches without sleep for 3 days running. First kill, second, third. They get faster because slower isn't an option. We lived on the northern ridge in conditions that would kill any ordinary city boy. But we weren't city boys. We were from Kurda, where 1 in 3 doesn't reach adulthood, from the cold and the hunger. We knew how to survive. They were just checking whether we could do it better than everyone else. There was one night I remember more clearly than all the rest. 19 of us left from the original 127. 19 boys on a frozen plateau where the wind cuts your cheeks like broken glass. We were supposed to stay there for 3 days. No food, no fire. 1 knife between 2. I shared the knife with Varian. We still trusted each other enough for that. We sat back to back. All through the first night, we slept in shifts. And the first thing you did when you woke up was check that the knife was still there. A reflex. No words needed. We both knew that either of us could take the knife and go. The rules allowed it. Nobody would have blamed you. But we sat. On the second day, he got sick. Something with his throat. Fever. I fed him snow and made sure he didn't fall into a deep sleep. He was angry, said he could handle it himself. I didn't argue, just stayed. He pulled through. It was the last thing we really did together. In the final examinations, I was near the front almost the whole time. Stronger than Varian, faster than most. I had a good instinct for ambushes and people. I could feel when someone nearby was about to strike first. The eyes change. The breathing changes. The muscles pull differently under the skin. That's not mysticism. That's the observational skill you develop when you live in constant competition. They walked us into the apothecarium aboard the orbital monastery, a massive structure hanging above Kurda, like a second metal sky. When they led us through the main nave toward the surgical bays, I couldn't think about anything except the scale of it. Ceilings 30 meters high, columns of white stone covered in script I couldn't read then, the smell of antiseptic, and something sweetly nauseating. Later, I learned to recognize that smell as living tissue during surgery. Apothecary Dreus explained everything to us the evening before, calm, like a teacher at an anatomy lesson. No ceremony, no grandeur, just listing. First 2 implants, the secondary heart and the os modula. The secondary heart, a backup. If one stops, the other keeps working. The os modula, the bone modulator. A small organ implanted at the base of the spine. It would begin working within a few days. In a year, your bones would be stronger than steel. In 3 years, you could absorb a blow that would fold an ordinary man in half. After successful integration, you move to the next implants. 19 total. Each requires time to bed in. We listened and nodded. Nobody asked what happens when the os modula doesn't take. They didn't tell us. The first 12 hours after implantation, I felt nothing. Lay in my cell, looked at the metal ceiling. One unusual thing, a faint pressure at the base of my spine, where they'd inserted the modulator, like something had settled in and was testing the space. Then it started. I'm going to describe the pain, and I'm asking you to take my word that I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't pain in the ordinary sense. Not a burn, not a cut, not a break. It was as if someone had pushed white-hot rods under the skin and began slowly, methodically bending them, bending my bones along with them, each vertebra individually, each rib. The temperature spiked so fast that the next several hours I have only in fragments. Faces of medics above me, cold metal of the table under my back, my own voice screaming something and then going quiet because the voice ran out. The os modula had begun its work too aggressively. My bones were trying to rebuild faster than the surrounding tissue could bear. 3 vertebrae deformed. The scapula grew ridges. The collarbone sprouted a chain of bone spurs that later fused crookedly. Apothecary Dreus looked at the readouts, then turned to me. Defective material, he said. Not unkindly, not with regret, the way you deliver a technical assessment. Rejection response with destructive pattern. Extract immediately. I was conscious, still alive, still understanding everything. Defective material. They pulled the os modula out 16 hours later. Too late. 3 vertebrae, a scapula, a collarbone. All of it healed eventually, but crooked, the way bone heals without setting. That's where the stoop comes from. That's where the pain every morning comes from. In Varian, the implant took on the 3rd day, smoothly, without complications. Drew said, exemplary material, and Varian lay in his cell with a faint smile, already feeling the change beginning. Then the next implant, and the next. Out of 40 candidates, 11 completed the full sequence. Those of us who were defective, we were given a choice. Go home, broken, with the reputation of someone rejected by the order. On Kurda, that meant roughly the same as a leper, or stay, serve. Some went home. I've heard it didn't go well for them. I stayed, not out of devotion, out of pride, the rough, stubborn pride of a man who's been discarded but refuses to walk away. I'll be near, I thought. I'll know everything from the inside. I'll be needed. That was my mistake. Thinking that needed and important are the same thing. When I was still in the infirmary, Varian came to say goodbye. He'd already changed in the months I'd been lying there. Shoulders wider, voice lower. He shook my hand, but firmly, genuinely, Wanyan said, "The Order will not forget that you tried." He was wrong. The Order forgot. And he forgot too. Or not forgot. but filed it away in the part of memory that isn't useful in combat. I never worked out which of those is worse. Cleaning the training cage is not work anyone writes hymns about. A hall 40 meters long, floor of ridged metal, walls pocked with marks from bolt rounds and training blades. Some of the dents are so deep I can press my finger in and not feel the bottom. After every training session, casings, sweat, blood, sometimes teeth. Neophytes fight at full force. No allowances, no softness. I arrived at the cage 40 minutes early, hoping to finish before the session started. They were already there. 5 scout neophytes working with training blades, sparring without a master, just pushing each other. I took the mop and started at the far wall. Don't look, don't interfere. I looked anyway. One of them, tall, dark-haired, his movements still angular, unrefined, kept making the same mistake again and again. On the draw, he lifted his left elbow too high, opened his left side. His partner hadn't yet learned to exploit it, so the attacks were getting through, and the dark-haired one thought he was doing well. But I saw it, and somewhere deep down, under the layers of age and exhaustion, there was still another Kyle, the one from Kurda, who knew how to hit. That inner Kyle was almost shouting it out loud, step right. Hook his right elbow from above, drag it down, and simultaneously, short thrust with the left under the ribs. I gripped the mop handle. Then the dark-haired one fainted, stumbled, and the training blade flew out of his hand. A beautiful arc straight to me. I caught it. A reflex, palm closing on the grip exactly the way it did 40 years ago on Kurda, when they were teaching us to handle hunting knives. Silence. 5 neophytes looking at me. The dark-haired one stepped forward, held out his hand. I gave him the blade. Handle first, the way it's done. He yanked it sharply. I felt the pull in my shoulder. Don't touch the sacred blade with dirty hands, Serf, he said, without malice, without heat. A simple statement of fact, the way you read a warning sign on a wall. They went back to their training. I went back to the mop, and that's when I felt it. The thing I'm still ashamed of. Envy. Animal. Grinding. Envy of that boy with the wrong elbow. Envy of the death he'd eventually get. A death with a name. His gene seed passed to the next generation. His helmet placed on a shelf in the reliquary. And someone like me polishing it every week. They'll remember him. And I'll be sweeping the floor after him. Several weeks later, I crossed paths in the corridor with Apothecary Seul. He was heading to the cage. Routine check on the neophytes. I stepped aside. He passed, then stopped. Kyle. I turned. Seul was looking at me with something you don't often see in an Astartes, something resembling deliberation. When you went through the initial selection, he said, your scores in reaction and spatial reasoning placed you in the top 5 out of 127. I know, I said. There's a hypothesis I've been developing for the next intake. He spoke slowly. In some candidates with unusually high neural activity, the os modula demonstrates an elevated rejection response. The nervous system may perceive the implant as a threat and attack it before it has time to adapt. If this is confirmed, candidates like that could be run through a different protocol. I looked at him. You're telling me this now, 50 years later. He tilted his head slightly. In an Astartes, that's somewhere between a nod and a shrug. I'm developing the protocol. The next candidates with those markers may pass successfully. Good, I said. Seul walked on. I stood in the corridor with my tools. He'd wanted to tell me something. I still don't know what. Maybe explain. Maybe, for them, this was what sorrow looks like. Technical data and hypotheses instead of, I'm sorry. Maybe it was all he had to give. That same night, when I couldn't sleep, I went to the Orders Library and read the Armor Care Regulations. 842 pages. On page 241, a single line. A servant whose care of the armor is without reproach participates indirectly in every victory of the brother he has clothed. Indirectly. I read that word several times, then closed the book and lay down right there on the library rug looking up at the ceiling. Indirectly participates. So I'd understood my life correctly. When the unyielding retribution drops out of the warp, it doesn't sound like anything else. First, a silence that presses harder than any noise, like someone took a dirty torn sheet and threw it over the sky outside the hull, and the whole world out there just disappears. That's what the warp is like from the inside. You feel it through 3 meters of steel and through the shields. Some servants can't bear it, and they hide in sections away from the viewport. I've almost gotten used to it. Then a blow, like a fist driven into your chest. Then sound. The ship arches like a living thing crossing from sleep into waking, and every bulkhead groans with metal at once. It feels like the unyielding retribution is pronouncing some word in a language that doesn't exist in any dictionary. Then the sirens. Then the duty officer's voice over the vox. Transition complete. System Valprinos. Battle readiness. That was how the Crimson Peaks campaign began. I was almost 50. I moved fast toward the armory. Left knee hurts on descents, but you keep moving. Because in the first hours after a warp exit, the work is heaviest. Final inspection of every pauldron, every gorget. Check of bolt magazines by marking in round type. Top up of power cells. Replacement of any consumable, showing less than 90% of resource. You can't make a mistake here. Nobody punishes you for a mistake here. People just die for it. Not you. Them. Assembly hall. 2 understrength companies in formation. 118 Astartes in full armor. When they stand like that, shoulder to shoulder all at once, an ordinary man gets a nosebleed. Literally, not a figure of speech. I walked around in my early years with cotton wool packed into my nostrils. It isn't just the sound, though the hum from their armor is enough to make glass vibrate. It's the presence itself. They take up space differently than people do. Like each of them carries an invisible volume extending several steps in every direction. Chaplain Sartall delivered the litany of hate. He walked before the formation, his voice amplified and tuned to the right frequency by his augmetics, hitting like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil. Even, heavy, unyielding with the pauses in exactly the right places. We are the Emperor's wrath. We are his retribution, poured out upon the faithless. In us there is no fear, for fear is weakness, and weakness is the first step to heresy. In us there is no doubt, for doubt opens doors to the dark. We are his weapon. We are his hand. We are unstoppable. We are death. I stood at the wall. My lips moved with all the rest. I knew those words by heart. 37 years of repetition, and they become part of you, like a scar on your temple. I believed them in my own way, but while my lips moved, I was thinking, this prayer is not for those who stand at the walls. It's for those whose armor burns with golden ornamentation, for those who have 19 implants that change the very substance of their being, for those whose body is no longer just a body, but something else, something that runs on 2 hearts, whose bones don't break from a bolt impact. I moved my lips and felt like a child repeating grown-up words without understanding their weight. Then the chaplain stepped aside, and Varian walked out before the formation, not to speak. He wasn't that kind. He just stood and looked at his brothers. That was enough. I watched the formation shift, not in movement, but in something else. Something in how they held their weapons, how they stood, as if he'd switched something on inside each of them with just the one look. I don't know how to do that. I never did. The formation moved toward the hangar. I stood at the rack of spare bolt magazines, in case of a last-minute swap. Varian walked past. I handed him 5 magazines, the ones he always takes above his standard load, his habitual insurance. He took them, checked the markings with a practiced thumb drag across the end face, and stowed them, without looking at me, without a word. Then he lowered the helmet onto his head. Lock. Click. That soft, deep sound of parts that fit each other perfectly. A face behind a mask. The yellow lenses of the eye lenses looked somewhere above me. He walked into the drop pod. The lid closed. Down the hangar, rows of pods stood ready, enough to deploy both understrength companies in waves, squad by squad. Red readiness runes burned steadily, sealed hatches. Somewhere below, the orbital bomber's engines humming, and that vibration traveled up through my boots, through the floor, through the body, settled in 3 vertebrae. 20 minutes later, the catapults fired, wave after wave. I heard them through the hull plating, dull sequential impacts, like someone hammering a fist on an iron barrel. 1, 1, 1. Then silence. I took a broom and started sweeping the hangar. I don't know how to describe waiting when people you know are dying somewhere out there. It's not the kind of waiting you do at a station.